So why is it that we communicate? Well, researchers have found that we communicate primarily for four different types of needs that we are or that we do have. The first one of those needs is physical needs. Now, the physical needs are the things that we get or we gain when we communicate with other people. Sometimes people who process a negative experience can put their feelings into words. And when people can do that, they report an improved satisfaction of life. Research from Ibarra et al. In 2008 suggests that in as little as 10 minutes of talking in a day, whether that's face to face or by phone, that can improve your memory and it boosts intellectual function. An example that we can see or that plays out in the book talks about when former U.S. Senator John McCain was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He was a prisoner of war for more than 5 years. And in the book, he talks about how important it was to remain in some sort of communication with the other POWs that were in the camp. And a bunch of things happened, but ultimately, the only thing that was worse than being a prisoner of war was being in isolation from the other people with you. Not only that, but a meta-analysis was done where 150 studies came together and showed that over the 300,000 roughly participants, those participants who were more socially connected with people ended up living 3.7 years on average longer than those who were or are or do remain isolated. So the physical needs of why we communicate are seen in these examples. Another example is of the Boy of Aveyron. I may be saying that wrong, but the Boy of Aveyron is a kid who was found in a French garden at at a young age. And not only was this kid found in the French garden, but the kid had no um, ability to connect with other human beings. And this brings us to the second point of why we communicate, and this is to fulfill our identity needs. So when you consider yourself, are you attractive? Are you not attractive? Are you smart? Are you not smart? Are you all these questions that we sometimes might consider or ponder. These aren't questions that you get answers from when you look in the mirror. These are questions that are shaped by the environment that we are raised in. Now, going back to the wild boy of Aveyron, in 1800, he was trying to get vegetables out of a French garden when someone found him. The boy had no human sense of being in the world at all. He had no sense of himself as a person in relation to other people. And it wasn't until he got some loving care and communication from a foster mom. It wasn't until then that he began to behave like a human is expected to behave. And so like an ultimate, I guess, like the foundation of communication filling your identity needs comes down to the idea that you gain an understanding of who you are from the way that others define you. All right. The next needs that get fulfilled in communication are social needs. We all know what social needs are. Goldschmidt, who is an anthropologist, he wrote in 1990 that the human career is basically that drive for meeting social needs through communication. Um, it's a strong link. So, an example would be children who grew up in a strong conversation oriented family. They report having more satisfying friendships and romantic partners when they become adults. More than any other activity, socializing has been reported by women in one study by Kahneman et al. In 2004 Those women say that socializing contributed more to a satisfying life than virtually anything else. It's pretty neat. All right. And so ultimately, it suggests that we are human beings, we are social creatures, and we benefit from making interpersonal connections, even if those interpersonal connections are small. Then the fourth way that we communicate is through practical needs. These are needs such as, can you cut a little bit of hair off the top? Talking to the cashier, or saying hi to somebody in the grocery store, or asking a grocery store clerk where an item is that you need, or talking to a mechanic about what is going on with your vehicle. These type things are practical needs. The things that we do to communicate to get through life on a daily basis is really all we're talking about here. And so this is the four fundamental ideas or needs that we can identify when we ask ourselves the question, why do we communicate? So the early models of the communication process were a little bit more simple than they are today. They began in the 1950s, as far as we know. They may have happened a little earlier, but in the 1950s, we started seeing research come across with models that created what they thought were the communication process. And they were very simple. And what can be characterized by most of those early models is the fact that that communication was a one-way linear event. It was something that a sender does by taking a message, making sense of it, and delivering it to somebody else, a receiver, who then decodes it. The the simile or metaphor that you can kind of picture is a person shooting an arrow at a target. And the person is the archer, right? That represents the archer or the sender. And the arrow that gets shot, that's representative of the message. And then the target that the arrow hits is representative of the receiver. And as you can tell, this might be a great model if you're not considering what type of feedback is required. Well, not every sort of interaction requires feedback, but later models include things such as feedback. And feedback is something that we can think of as a dynamic process. It's something that reflects what we call a transactional communication model. This transactional communication model, um, the characteristics of it are the fact that communicators can create meaning together through interaction, not just uh, a one-way linear idea. And we're going to look at these transactional models and see how we can make sense of it. So the transactional model includes two people, and we're going to call these people communicator A and communicator B. And the reason we're using the term communicator is because later years had researchers look at the communication models that existed and realized that a communicator in a speaking situation together is simultaneously sending, receiving, and assigning meaning to different messages. And so when communicator A is sending, receiving, and assigning meaning to communicator B, who is doing the same thing, and it's going back and forth, bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, there we can see how the transactional model makes sense. For instance, if I was communicator A and I'm sending a message to my son, and my son is not happy with the message I'm delivering, my son doesn't need to respond in order for me to understand that there's some sort of communicative feedback going on. That communicative feedback could be in the form of nonverbal clues, such as a frown on the face, or a scowl, or a smile, depending on what the message is. So I can receive the information that he's sending. Um, and so in any situation that you can look at, you see that environment A and environment B, these environments are not the environment solely, like what is in place right now. The environment is more about the perspective and the experience that someone has had in the past. So it doesn't refer to just the physical location now, but it refers to those personal experiences and the cultural backgrounds that participants in a conversation, when they are communicating, where they come from. Right? So think about how you're receiving a message and you're assigning meaning to a message would be different if your personal history was different. Just think about that. And as you think about that, I want you to realize that just because we are coming into a situation where we take one environment of B and another environment of A, and we're coming together, and this space right here is the environment of the situation at hand. This is where both of these are integrating. And the channel that we choose to use is just the medium that the message has to go through. And so this message could be anything. It could be a text message. It could be a verbal response. It could be nonverbal. But this message is conveyed through a channel. And the channel, let's say the message was a text message. The channel would be the text. The message would be the words of the text. So I hope that makes sense. And then surrounded by everything is what we call noise. And noise is included in all of this. And the noises that we experience, they range. They range from uh, three different types. And these three different types of noise that we can hear or that can influence our receiving a message properly include external, physiological, and psychological noise. Now, external noise, these are noises like outside factors, like you might hear my dog growling at the window behind me. She's growling at people walking by and dogs walking by. And so that is external noise, the noise we hear outside, cars driving by, construction, a clap, a knock, a doorbell, music, whatever makes it physically hard to hear a message. That's external. Now, physiological noise involves factors that are more biological. These factors are things like hearing loss, maybe illness, and those type things. So think of maybe some cognitive learning um, situations that might be going on, different things like that. And then the third type is psychological. And psychological noise refers to the factors, the cognitive factors that make communication less effective. So these things are called like, or these things are seen in examples such as when somebody may call a woman a girl, and that girl becomes mad, or that woman becomes mad because she doesn't like being spoken to like a child. Maybe it's the receiver is upset or tired or hungry or whatever, insert adjective here, right? And it happens in all types of situations. One of the principles we have to keep in mind is the fact that communication is transactional. And what we mean simply is that communication is not something that we do to others, but rather it is an activity that we do with others. And so if you think about it in a sense of a dancing partner, no matter how skilled you are, your success depends on how the other person is able to adapt and flex and be in that dance with you. Same as communication. The other person's behavior is going to impact how your communication success is. It's transactional, so in and among and with other people, not to other people. And psychologist Kenneth Gergen of 1991, puts it in a very clear way when he mentions that one cannot be attractive without people who are attracted to them. A leader cannot be a leader without people who are willing to follow. And a loving person cannot be a loving person without someone to love, or someone that is being loved, a recipient of that love. Right? And so communication is transactional. Communication can also be intentional or unintentional. Unintentional communication could be a nonverbal expression of not being happy or satisfied or angry or happy, whatever the case is. It could be when you are mumbling under your breath because of something happened, but someone overhears you. You don't intend for that person to hear you, but they do. And so that message is communicated whether you intended for it to be or not. This is to say that all behavior has communicative value, and none of the communication, or I'm sorry, and none of the behavior that you have when communicating can say, I'm not communicating. Even the idea of sleeping or being silent in a situation where you think a response is needed is communicating something. And that communication could be, I'm just not interested, or I'm tired, or I'm not ready for this. But you are always communicating. And something we see in the book is the quote of saying, nothing never happens. Nothing never happens. Right? Now, communication is also irreversible. You cannot do, or you cannot undo communication. Think about when a lawyer knows that they are about to say something that will be objected by another lawyer. Well, objected, uh, once that objected uh, statement is made, and the jury hears that statement, the other lawyer can object to that statement all they want. It still is going to be a message that that jury heard. Whether they are directed by the judge to forget it or not include it or disregard it or any of that, it's already been made and it can't be taken back. If you say hello and you have a good interaction with somebody today, and then you think to yourself, that went really well. When you see them next week and you try to have that same conversation, it might not land the same way because the two of you have changed. You have experienced different experiences, you've dealt with different things, you have handled things differently. And yes, it's only a week, but you're a different person, you're in a different situation, you're in a different frame of mind. And therefore, that same attempt at communicating might not land. Of course, yes, it might, but it might not. And therefore, we cannot say that communication is reversible. Right? And another principle is the fact that communication has both a content and a relational dimension. And what we mean by that is a content dimension involves the information that is explicitly being discussed or said in the message, whatever that message is. Please pass the salt. Please go to bed. Whatever the case is, right? Uh, please come to bed. Please go to bed. Please take a shower. Please do this. Please do that. I don't like it when you do this. Leave me alone. All of these things that you can say have literal denotative messages, that are being said, the words that are being said. But the relational dimension of the message is something that will allow you to express how you feel about the other person that you are communicating that message to. For example, something in your tone might reflect whether you like or dislike another person, or whether you feel in control or not, or whether you feel comfortable or anxious. Depending on the relationship you have with that other person, will determine the relational dimension of the message that you're saying. And the communication principle here is that each message has a content dimension and a relational dimension. And so we've talked about communication principles. I want to talk to you about communication misconceptions. And a few of them here. We'll start off with the idea that communication seeks understanding. Well, that is a misconception because not all communication does seek to understand. Consider the social rituals that we do every day. The hey, how's it going? You're asking another person that you don't really know. They say great, but maybe they're not really doing great. Maybe they are just doing that because the exchange is just meant to be a social ritual. It's not meant to say anything other than, oh, I see you as a person. You see me as a person. All right, that's it. Just a cordial way to go about, um, I guess, interacting with somebody. Sometimes you're communicating not to seek understanding, but to influence others. Television commercials, that's a good example. They're always trying to persuade you into something, to perform an action. They show you what you're missing out on. They tell you, wouldn't life be cool with it? Then they ask you, come on down and test drive the car, or whatever the case is. Right? They are not trying to understand you. They are trying to reach you and influence you to persuade you into doing something that they want you to. Another way we communicate without seeking understanding is when we are trying deliberately to be ambiguous or even deceptive with our speaking, with our message. When you tell somebody at the bar who's been flirting with you that you have a significant other when you don't, it's a lie, but you are trying to say it in a way that is less hurtful than get away from me, I'm not interested. And so all of these situations show that not every time are we seeking understanding when we are communicating. And also the idea that more communication is not always better. Um, Sometimes talking too much aggravates the situation, it aggravates the problem. Consider when you're fighting with one of your, a loved one. Sometimes when you're fighting and you're angry and you're saying things you don't want to, maybe it's best to just be quiet. Just for a little while, process things, and allow those things to boil over a little bit before you try to communicate and talk it out. Another idea is that communication will solve all problems. Well, unfortunately, communication will not solve all problems. It's not going to solve a problem when someone asks you, hey, how does this shirt look on me? And the shirt doesn't look good. So you tell that person, hey, that shirt looks terrible on you. That's not going to solve a problem. But it is a honest opinion if that's what you really feel. And so why would that not solve all our problems? Well, sometimes saying something just to allow the other person to feel better about it is okay. I.e., the shirt looks good. It really does. I do think that you would look better wearing this shirt. I love that shirt on you. There's some communication that solves some problems if the receiver takes it, but you got to be careful with that, right? Not everybody knows how to answer and communicate problems that will, or communicate in ways that will solve problems. And that's okay because not all of us are going to be good at it all the time. Another thing about communication that is often not seen properly is the fact that people will think that communicators are naturally born. It's a natural ability to communicate well. Well, that's not true. Effective communication is not a natural ability. It takes practice, it takes training, it takes an intentional effort to increase your capability of being an effective communicator. just like any other skill. If you don't practice it, then you will not get better. So, what makes communication interpersonal? Well, scholars have found there's been a couple things. First is the number of people that are interacting. And in this case, we're going to consider, or in this case, a dyad, which is two people interacting and coming together. That is the quantitative number that will, I guess, make what we're talking about interpersonal communication, especially in this class. Now, there's some arguments a where researchers have considered different things that make communication interpersonal versus impersonal, and one of these things is quantitative. A quantitative approach suggests that interpersonal communication by the numbers of communicators. And so by that measurement, by that objective statement, any two-person exchange will fit the definition of a dyad. So if you were ordering coffee at Starbucks, or you were asking for directions or applying for a driver's license in person, this might be considered interpersonal communication in some contexts. Just like in some contexts, qualitative interaction, meaning the uh, treating each other with, I don't know, a sense of them being unique and important, and the conversation is unique, and all of this creates a more unique interpersonal experience, an interpersonal approach to communication. And so we can talk about this a little bit more. The uniqueness of the relationship is something that will determine how interpersonal a message can be. And it's important to think about this on a linear type scale, from left to right, going on infinity. Interdependence, or what we might consider um, how each person is connected, right? How each person in the exchange is connected. Where uniqueness kind of defined the idea that you might exchange one uh, message with a friend, that you might not exchange that same message in I don't know, somewhere else, because you don't want to offend maybe your in-laws or something like that. Interdependence is talking about how uh, it's going to mean more when your brother or your friend or your sister says something to you out of anger or sadness, but when a stranger does it, you might not really care about what that person says. Right? Another characteristic of interpersonal communication is self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is how you, or how much you reveal about yourself. In interpersonal exchanges, you're more likely to share important thoughts and important feelings that reflect your comfort with the other person. Not all relationships, go through this idea of uh, self-disclosure, because not all self-disclosure is positive. It's possible that you self-disclose some things that are not that are not a positive trait, but you would probably only say some of those things, those self-disclosive things, to people that you are closer with. And you would say things less positive to people that you might not be in such an interpersonal relationship with. And another characteristic, the last one, is the intrinsic rewards that come with interpersonal communication. These are things that we can think of these things as what's in it for me in this relationship. And I know it sounds selfish, but you have to um, know that there is something that you want, that you benefit from when in a conversation with, like when you're communicating interpersonally. And if you don't receive what you're trying to get, then you're not really going to be satisfied in that context, in that situation. So, an example, here you are, you're listening to me talk to you. Um, you are only listening because you want to get the knowledge so that you can pass this class successfully, or you can learn the knowledge and use it to benefit your life. These are things that you would listen to me for. If I no longer offered you something like that, you probably would not be here listening to this PowerPoint slide. Basically, intrinsic rewards can be summed up by saying, what is the payoff of this relationship for each person? And that payoff is going to be something that is needed to describe how interpersonal that communication could be. And here we have that linear scale I was talking about. And if you come over to the right, you're looking at a highly interpersonal communication. And these are marriages, a marriage proposal, asking for forgiveness. These are things, they're highly unique, they're highly self-disclosed. You do a lot of self-disclosure. A lot of intrinsic rewards are attached to this. Um, this is, the more salient that the relationship is, the higher or more highly it will be on the interpersonal side. But coming over to the left hand side, and remember, this is linear, it goes all the way. The more left you are, the more impersonal that interaction is. And this is scheduling an appointment, or um, answering a survey call, or um, maybe just passing somebody you don't know at the park, and waving hi. All right, these are impersonal, and it's on a range, right? So in this area, we're looking at the center, and then you go all the way to the extreme, one way or the other. This is just a visual representative of that. So I'm sure we're in this class because we want to learn how to become confident communicators. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I can teach you some things in some ways that research has shown that will improve your competence as a communicator. But there really is no single ideal or effective way to do this. There really isn't. It takes several things. But when you ask yourself, what does it take to communicate better? Well, let's look. Most scholars are going to agree that communication competence means the ability to achieve goals in a manner that is both effective and appropriate. To understand what those two dimensions are, I want you to consider how you might handle everyday communication challenges, such as declining an unwanted invitation or asking a friend to stop some sort of annoying behavior. In these cases, effective communication would get you the results that you wanted, but appropriate communication would do so in a way that avoids damaging the relationship in which it occurs. There is no single ideal or effective way to communicate this. You have to understand that communication needs and requires flexibility. When you're interacting with people from different cultures or subcultures, things are going to be different. Some customs that are appropriate here in America might not be so appropriate in other parts of the world. Sometimes here in the United States, it's looked at as a good quality to self-disclose and talk straight and not beat around the bush. But in some countries, it's less important. In fact, it could even be considered aggressive or insensitive. Competence in communication It is also situational. Communication competence functions to different degrees and or in different areas. You might know some people who are really competent in some aspects of communication. They may know exactly what they're feeling or what they want or who, what they're good at, and uh, whether they are interacting with other people that are um, the same, in the same social class, or are they poor or wealthy, or whatever. Maybe they're not as strong and powerful as far as what image you set them in, and this is might change how you address or communicate in those situations. Some situations, we might be incredible at speaking and incredible communicators. But in other situations, those same incredible communicators could be challenged by other things. And that's all right. And it's all right because competence can be learned. Communication competence is something that can continue to get better over and over. We can train, we can get classes, we can get experience, we can observe, and we can take all of these things and we can learn from the good and the bad on what makes good communication. And because it's us observing, we can be the ones who can subjectively decide whether that communication is a confident communication or not. Some characteristics can describe competent communication though. First thing is you need to have a large set of skills. And if you have this set of skills that you can rely on and you can pull from in different situations, that's going to be the best way at approaching multiple situations. You can't approach the same situation in different, you can't approach uh, the same uh, context, or the same, I guess, you can't have that same approach to everything in every situation. You have to adapt and flex and understand that what you say to somebody who might be having a great day is not going to be the same thing that you can say to somebody who's not having a great day. You have to be adaptable, right? Um, you need to be able to select what responses are appropriate for the situation at hand. An example would be how you change your dress and your speaking and your tone and your pitch when you're going in for a job interview. You don't have the same idea or approach to communication when you're hanging out with your friends and your loved ones. You put on this ability is called code switching. And code switching, it's not being fake, it's just understanding and having the competence to know that you need to be uh, adaptable in certain situations. And so we code switch to move between more casual and formal modes of talking, right? Of sending a message, because you can send any sort of message that you want. Another characteristic of a competent communication is the ability to perform skillfully. And what this means is a certain behavior, right? Uh, like I said earlier, communication is something that takes practice to be good at. And some of the tools that we use for communicating in this book, we'll be able to see there's some activities that you should look at and develop and enhance. And we'll do some of these activities throughout the course as well. Characteristics of competent communication continued is having empathy and being able to take the perspective of someone else's point of view. This is a very hard thing for us to do as people, but other people have and see things differently in the world. And the ability to kind of put someone else's shoes on will help you be more competent in understanding when it comes to communicating. Cognitive complexity is simply just the ability to make or construct a variety of different frameworks for viewing an issue. This is kind of like perspective taking, although cognitive complexity doesn't just take the idea of getting into somebody's shoes and seeing things through their eyeballs. It's adapting and making a different idea for why you might be seeing or hearing or attending to the message that you are hearing. And another skill is called self monitoring, where you pay close attention to your own behavior and you use what you observe to shape and change the way that you are communicating in that moment. Maybe these are things where you can say, "Oh, I'm doing this well," or "I'm not doing this well," or "This is going great. I'll keep doing what I'm doing," or "I'm making a fool out of myself," or whatever. Self monitoring is just knowing when is the best time to maintain, change, or approach a communication situation.